Hi, you guys. Welcome to Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. I'm your host, Dr. Jefferson, and tonight I have a lot. We're going to talk about a lot of things tonight. We're going to talk about some coping mechanisms for you guys that are going through a very highly distressful time right now in your life. People that are going through transitions. The My suggestions for healthy ways to cope with difficult transitions tonight. And I was sent a request from a viewer to give my commentary on the deadly shooting in Lakeland, Florida, over the weekend involving a veteran as the person who was responsible for the shooting. And yeah, I'm going to talk about that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and roll the show intro and we'll jump right into things. See you in a bit. Welcome back, you guys. So, for those of you who are viewing the show for the very first time, I want to welcome you guys to this platform. This is an accountability platform. I usually have very controversial discussions on this platform, and some lighthearted discussions, I think, as well. I have conversations that tend to be very difficult to for us to engage around issues that affect the Black, brown, melanated community in America and abroad. Sometimes it's hard for us to just call a thing and talk about the things that we do that affect our community at large. And I think it's important that we learn to embrace the things that affect our community, that we have a play in, right? And ultimately, these things are things that we can change effectively if we see that these things are not necessarily conducive to the overall gain that we would like to see, right? So, um, I would like to start off by saying shout out to the chat because my chat is always very lively and always has, lots of people who are very much engaged and involved in the discussion. As you guys come in, if you have any questions or whatever, even if you catch me on the replay, let me know that you're catching me on the replay. And if you have any questions throughout the video, feel free to comment because I will be coming back to kind of shed light on things that you have questions on, because this conversation generally for the actual discussion for tonight's show will be kind of clinical, but on a lay terms scale. So we'll be talking about the way that these numbers and these things affect you in your life and your experience in our community. And we'll be talking about the way that we've normalized some of these cycles of behavior that contribute to the presentation of the issue. I know that suicide is a very, very difficult topic for most people to talk about. And I think substance use is even more of a difficult topic for Black and brown people to talk about because we've normalized the use of substances so much now. And I think that people, at least 70% of the adult population of American people in the Black and brown community, have some ties to substance use. Okay. At least 70%. I'm just going to call a thing out here. So there's that part. Before I get into the topic of the night, though, I want to go ahead and address this because it's a lot. Okay. So it concerns the deadly shooting that took place in Lakeland, Florida, over the weekend involving, it was a Marine veteran, actually. So for the viewer who sent me this, I am an Army veteran. Not that there is a whole bunch of difference between Army and Marines. We're both kind of boots on the ground, but and training is kind of similar as well. This is a really, really difficult one for me, and it's still very fresh. So what I'll say is this. It's a real issue. I feel like oftentimes, the amount of help, the amount of assistance, the amount of support even for veterans who are returning is not sufficient. And I say it every day. I feel like, after the extent of what we do overseas, the type of work that we put in when we're deployed, the type of sacrifice we make for our country in general, even for those soldiers who never are deployed. I don't feel like the mental health care, the physical health care, I feel like care across the board is insufficient. And both situations are a detriment. I really just don't have any words. It's hard because a baby was killed. And I think everybody knows how I feel about that. I think the baby was 3 months old, a little boy. But it's a double-edged sword. So it's a, man. The 11-year-old girl, my heart, my thoughts, my reflections, my prayers are with her, with the family. I do believe she's still in and out of surgery. I think they said that she was shot 7 times. It's a lot, but I can't convey I can't convey what's in the mind of a person who's been in and experienced these very different experiences in combat, and when that stuff starts to filter over into the reality that we are currently experiencing here. If you don't have a healthy system and a healthy means of addressing that, it leads to this. And I don't want to excuse it. So it's just a lot. So you just don't have the right words. I don't think anybody has the right words for that, right? Like, I don't think any kid at 11 years old in America should have to go through the waking up, from their bed at 4 a.m. to being viciously attacked with guns, right? Bullets through her body. And yeah. So the mother was killed. The father was killed. The 3-month-old boy was killed. And the grandmother, she was killed in a separate home on the property. But I'm absolutely sure that this veteran did not intentionally come to this home with the intention to do harm to a family. So that's why I say it's like a double-sided thing. And it's, I'm just, my heart goes out to his family too. And to him, because I know what this is like personally. So it's a lot, you guys. It's a lot, and I think that he's going to have to come to terms with and come to grips with the reality. And when he does wake up and he realizes, hey, listen, this is actually what was happening. This was actually a baby. This was actually an American family. This dude was in full tactical gear. He was in full tactical gear. He responded in the same way. He returned fire when the police lieutenant came into the home and tried to save the family. He took the lives of these people with the police actively engaged. It took him to be shot by police to come to his senses and realize that he was not in war. I don't think that people are looking at it for what it is. And I think that it's irresponsible for a sheriff to call him a monster. So I got a lot of feelings. I do about that. So it's a hard one on both ends. It's on both ends of it, because it's like, how do you turn that off effectively without adequate help, and bridging that gap? And I think maybe he just didn't get what he needed. But I see that every day. Like, there are support groups everywhere on social media for veterans who are returning. And I notice that, even my close comrades sometimes, report not having adequate support, not being able to get adequate services and things like that from a practitioner when they come here. And even myself, I've had issues, in my earlier years in transitioning that kept me away from my family because I wasn't ready to transition. So I know what that's like, and it's hard, and it's unfair. But I think that you got to just fight harder, because you got to have in the back of your mind, you got to understand that you are a potential threat to society. So, it's just a lot. It's a lot across the board. Yeah, so if any of you, I know that one of my regular followers lives in Florida. I think you say he lives in North Florida though, Mr. Brooks. But let me know what you guys are feeling about that situation. But for the viewer who sent me this, to answer your question, it's not a question of why the veterans aren't getting the help that they need. I think the veterans are trying to get the help they need, but here's the thing. This person wasn't retired. He had served out contracts, and he had served out his military contracts to the Marine Corps. He had transitioned. I think he was in the reserves and was also mobilized. He did several tours of service in war and combat active. Let me tell you something. It's easy for civilians to have the mindset and think that they understand what it's like to go to combat, but you don't. For people who survive going to Afghanistan, it's a whole different thing over there. It's a whole different thing. So I know what he's gone through. And it's just a lot. He's been to Afghanistan, he's been to Iraq. He's had so many tours of duty. I think that he's not been able to get the adequate care because without being retired, you don't get access to full benefits of healthcare unless you file a claim and end up getting, like, I think 90% disability or 70% or something like that. Like, so, and it's a long, tedious process that they take you through. So I think that's the problem. It's the fucking government. That's what it is. That's how I feel. And I feel like that also is something that contributes to some of the conversation that we're going to have today. It contributes to the increased numbers of suicide. It definitely contributes to the increase in people who are struggling with suicidal ideation because they feel, there is no way out and they don't feel like they can, access adequate means of coping through the recurring dreams, nightmares, thoughts, visions. Man, I just feel really bad though for this whole situation. My energy, thoughts, reflections, prayers, all of that to everybody involved, to his family, to their family on all ends, because that's a lot of people involved, you guys. I think that the girlfriend of the veteran is now very much involved in cooperating with the authorities and everything. And that's a very, very difficult place to be in. It really is. So we're going to talk about, before we get into the suicide component, we're going to talk about the deaths from overdoses and how they've soared over the past year or whatever during the pandemic. I'm sure you guys know there is a comedian by the name, what's his name? Fuquan, is it Fuqua? Fuquan Johnson. Have you guys heard about him? Fuquan Johnson. He was amidst 3 people who died of an overdose. They found them early Saturday morning, also this weekend. But they found them early Saturday morning. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the California area, but in Venice Beach area in LA County. Found them all 3 dead from drug overdose. Okay. Now, I want to talk about how many people realize, how many folks that are in Hollywood that really reach high spaces, high areas. They reach higher capacities in life, right? Successful places in their lives. And then they start using drugs. We had to suffer. We saw Whitney Houston. We saw DMX. Who else? What's this? Mac. What's that white guy's name? He was really cool. He put out some pretty decent music that my kids listen to. Very troubling though, lyrics. If you guys know the name, if you know who I'm trying to reference, then share it with me. I can't remember his name right now. It's kind of leaving me. But several people in music automatically go to substance use, heavy heavy drugs, heroin, cocaine, right? The hard stuff. And what we know is that the hard stuff tends to lose potency after you've been doing it for a while. The efficacy of it, it's no longer giving you a high. And what we notice is that people are always trying to one up, one up, one up, one up. So these folks are having their, you could say, COVID party. It's a COVID appropriate, or, party, 5 people large. And the police arrived and they found the 3 dead. And the other girl, what's her name? She's also a comedian, Quigley. Kate Quigley. She was the one that played on The Office and Star Trek. Hidden Frontier is also some of the work that she was featured in. So she was found non-responsive, not dead though. She was transported to the hospital where she was treated. She's now been listed in more stable condition, but she was kind of, she had a rough go of it in the beginning. But I don't know how many of you know about fentanyl, right? So fentanyl is, well, I'm not going to say how many of you know about it, but know about the dangers of it. So people die from drug overdoses in insurmountable numbers. Okay. And you guys typically think you know what you're doing, and you say, okay, well, you know what? The drugs make me feel XYZ, or it's not going to do this because it's also prescribed for people. The thing is, doctors have a particular algorithm that we use in order to make a prescription non-lethal to a human being. We're looking at the BMI, we're looking at your height, your weight, because your height and your weight index tells us what's the appropriate dosage for this person in the half-life, what its effects, would be on the person. And so that's how we can safely prescribe. So you can't go and just decide to make the decisions on your own. Okay? Medical history, contributing factors, the way that your body metabolizes things, all of this is also a part of the puzzle. You don't have access to that on the street, sir, ma'am, drug dealer, all that. So I think it's really interesting how people are like, oh, well, no, you know what I'm saying? I'm just looking to get high and it's only going to do this for me, blah, blah, blah. So it's really important, I think, to educate yourself before you kind of put yourself in a position to where you're now using these drugs as a means to cope, or just feel like you're feeling good, you're taking the edge off, et cetera, and you're actually causing a higher degree of distress for yourself. So fentanyl is stronger than morphine, you guys. Okay. Morphine is considered to be our last option typically when we have somebody that is on hospice, someone that we know is going to die. We want to make them comfortable. We want to take the pain away and make them comfortable, but we know they're going to die. So it's like, you can use something strong because they don't need neuroplasticity. They don't need their brain, right? They only want to be comfortable. So we can take all the pain away, ease the pain, and they can slip into a deep sleep and they can die. We now use fentanyl for that. And this is what you're using to lace your cocaine with, your heroin with, putting it in there before you. I sometimes, your weed with. Sometimes I don't understand how we can normalize some of the things that we normalize, given the outcomes that we see in our community. Like, we can see the detriment, but we continue to engage in these same said behaviors. And I know, like, folks tell me all the time, like, oh, you just think that way because you never use drugs. But no, it's not because I never use drugs. It's because I'm a person that's a pragmatist. So for me, it's got to make sense. I'm willing to take risk as long as those risks tell me that the outcomes are going to outweigh the risks. You see what I'm saying? The outcomes are going to be awesome, high. Those rewards are going to be heavy. So I need my benefits to be greater than the risk. That's just something that I've always needed. So what I need you guys to do is to move out of this idea that it's okay for us to use these substances because nobody's reported that we're dying from this particular thing. Several people come into the ER, and the one thing that they have in their system that's congruent is cannabis. We have other unidentified substances in the system too, and most of the time it's due to the fact that their cannabis or their weed the THC has been laced, right? And it's been laced with something that we haven't seen before. And sometimes it's fentanyl that's in there. But by the time we can identify the source or the compound that's in the cannabis, right, or what they've actually taken because they're not conscious to give us the information, sometimes the patient dies. How many times does this have to continue to happen before people wake up and say, well, you know what? This is something that is actually killing us. So today I'm going to show you guys some numbers today, but first we're going to have this discussion and we're going to talk about how these numbers have increased tremendously. So I put up a stat earlier, said that the deaths from drug overdoses soared to more than 93,000. I think it was like 93,780, according to the CDC's report from the last year. And the last year's reports were released in July 2021 on 21st. So many people within the Black community have said this: lace drugs are the problem, Dr. Jefferson. Like we can have the drugs. The drugs have never been an issue for us. Just don't understand it. I don't understand it. Regardless of what you see every day, it's only the lace drugs that's killing you, not the regular drugs. So you're not dying by accident because you got so high that you didn't know you got so high that you never woke up or you woke up dead. Like that's not an issue. But okay. All right. The thing is, dead people don't talk. So you don't know that it's happening because they never were able to come back and tell you that it happened to them because they died. Go figure. So the thing is, it never makes the news unless it's a person who is an icon, part of Hollywood. It has to be a story in order for it to be a story. Does that make sense? In order for a reporter to chase it, it has to be something that's going to make people gravitate their attention towards it. So because this is a comedian, because both of these people are comedians, they're very important. So they're going to be listed. People are going to talk about it. However, what people are not going to talk about, the folks they're not going to mention the other people who died. Enrico Colangeli, he's 48. He's from Massachusetts. He died also. Same situation. He was with them. Snorting cocaine laced with fentanyl. Nobody's going to hear about him. You want to know why? Because he wasn't Fuquan Johnson. Okay? That's why. That's the reason. So he's not a comedian. So nobody cares. Natalie Williamson, she was 33. She was with them as well. Snorting that coke, laced with fentanyl. Nobody's going to hear about her. She was from Los Angeles. You want to know why nobody's going to talk about her? Because she's not a story. Because she's not a comedian. You understand what I'm saying? So she's a regular person, a regular schmegular person. So whatever dynamic, whatever her regular crew is that she hangs with, whatever her race is, whatever her posse is on the streets that she uses drugs with. I don't know the language you guys use in the substance abuse culture, whatever that is. But these people will not talk about her. You want to know why? because she can't talk because she's dead. The news will not talk about her because she's not a comedian. The only people they will highlight is these people who are important to the rest of the world because they are comedians. So the rest of the substance use population, everybody who has normalized it, will continue to use same said substances in an abundance because it feels good. It makes you float like you're floating on the clouds. Like, can't make this stuff up. My patients have told me this. And to be honest with you, I'm like, well, shit, I don't want to float on the clouds because I've jumped out of enough planes and shit almost gave me a heart attack the first couple of times. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to float. I don't want to float on the clouds. But if you're into floating on the clouds, let's explore that. What makes you want to continuously go right back there to that same spot you were just floating on? So why you want to go back and float so quickly? Can you go to the ground? Can we get some balance first? Let's agree to have balance for 24 hours before we float. Let's find a way to reduce the amount of times that we're floating. My thing is this: if we are people that are going to improve the number of people who are dying from overdoses, we have to first say that this thing is happening to us. We have to first say that people, once they die from an overdose, they can't come back and tell you they did. So we don't have accurate information as to how they died, because they died and they were forgotten and nobody talked about it. So while it is that you guys are out here using all these different strains of cannabis that makes you feel all these different types of high, some of it definitely could be laced with fentanyl. It could. And you wouldn't know. All you would know is that it just made you feel a different type of high.
Until you die.
Right. Until you die.
Yeah. They do your little autopsy and find what happened.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, when they do say that after the autopsy concludes that you've died from a drug overdose, the most prominent drug in your system from your toxicology report, if we report that it was fentanyl, because we know that fentanyl is a deadly drug, we know that certain amounts of it can cause death, we're going to list it. We're not going to list the cannabis that aided in it. So fentanyl in certain amounts is not deadly unless another drug accommodates it. So that's where the part about you guys understanding that cannabis can lead to death is very important. That's what I need to convey to you guys, because I feel like so many people are like, oh no, I've been smoking weed for all my life. Until you smoke that last joint and you don't smoke no more.
Not today's stuff. It ain't the same.
Exactly. So I just need you guys to just be more cognizant. I just need you to be more woke, as they say, and call a thing. Okay? That's it. Okay? So people who die as a result of suicide after using drugs to overdose, sometimes those numbers are not recorded as suicide because we do not have a note. And the substance abuse conversation is a very important one because it applies to the conversation around suicide, because people start using substances as a means to cope. And I already put up the headliner of normalizing it in our culture, because what happens is, if we're using substances as a means to cope with the fact that today was a very stressful day, or my baby mama pissed me off, or my baby daddy's causing me distress, or these people at my work, at my workplace are causing me heavy distress, or they're always on me, blah, blah, blah. My parents are on my ass, blah, blah, blah. All of these things that happen that cause us significant distress, that drive us to a place to where we are no longer 100% functional and capable of dealing with our lives in a way that is the most conducive of positive outcomes. Okay. If we're driven to those places and we learn how to call these things too much for us and start externalizing these things. So this is just me going through a stressful moment. Instead of me rolling up a blunt, saying, now I feel better. Because rolling up a blunt doesn't equate to you feeling better. That's what I need you guys to understand. The takeaway is the blunt is you putting on a coat, right? And going outside in the winter's cold air, saying that now it's warm outside. It's not warm outside. It's not warm outside. You just put a coat on and walked outside. But as soon as that coat comes off, you're cold again. Or as soon as you stay outside for too long, exposed to the cold, you're still going to be cold again. So the same thing happens when you're using the substances to mask you. Yes, you feel good momentarily. You only feel good momentarily because everything else is dead. You numb your neuroreceptors from sending messages, signals, and your synaptic responses from responding accordingly to let the messengers know that, hey, we're experiencing heavy distress here. We're overwhelmed here. So what happens is when all of a sudden the high is gone, not only are you overwhelmed and feeling sad and distressed, but now you're feeling anxious, agitated, hostile, and your moods are not congruent. You're not who you would normally be. So that means when somebody asks you, hey, can you close that door? What you hear is, close the door. And nobody ever said that. Nobody was ever coming with that kind of energy. But that's the way you take everything, because now your perception is skewed. So I think that you guys need to give more credit to the fact that your experiences are altered. And I think I hear from people all the time, like, okay, you're saying I'm high, but I'm really not. Like, this ain't really a high for me. This is just a little buzz. But you're not observing yourself when you're not high versus when you're high. So the thing is, an altered mental state can only be observed by a person who doesn't have one. Does that make sense? So you got to learn how to have people in your circle who are not on substances at all, so that you can have a reliable perspective of how you present. If you're going to use substances, that's going to be the way that you can do it safely. Does that make sense? So let's talk about the increase in let's talk about suicide. Okay. First of all, I'm going to put up the definition so you guys can understand suicide in its fullest capacity. Suicide is defined as death caused by self-directed injurious behaviors with the intent to die as a result of the behavior. Remember, I talked about people who overuse substances and then they wake up dead. And the fact that, we don't include these deaths as a part of the national suicide deaths. So drug overdose and suicide deaths are not correlated unless we find a suicide note that's accompanying the drug overdose. The number of times that happen is like slim to none. So I want you to keep that in mind when I show you what the numbers are for this past year. Okay. So self-directed injurious behaviors with the intention to die as a result of that behavior. Okay. So suicidal ideation, because these are things that you guys are going to hear me talk about. Suicidal ideation refers to thinking about, considering, okay, or planning suicide. So you could just be thinking about it. Now, thinking about suicide, this is where it gets real tricky. Which one is the why? Oh, why don't we include the drug overdose as a part of the suicide numbers? Is that what you're asking? But thinking about suicide could simply be thinking about ending a very difficult experience. Okay. But that's the reason we don't include the deaths that result that result from, overusing substances as our suicide numbers, because sometimes people accidentally overdose, like DMX. You know, but when I give you this definition, when I give you the suicidal ideation definition, it might expand your overview or your outlook on DMX as well. Okay. And give you insight as to why it is that people said that Whitney died of a suicide versus just drowning as a result of her being overdosed. Okay. So when we talk about suicidal ideation, thinking about suicide could be thinking about the fact that whatever situation or distress that you're currently engaged in right now is so heavy that you just want to go to sleep and never wake up again. Right? Think about what I just said. Like, I just want to disappear. Hear me. To want to disappear equates to not existing. So, really, hear what I'm saying. If you don't exist, then you're not alive. Sometimes we don't even know before it's too late. But there are several people who have attempted suicide that I've interviewed during a crisis interview, and people who have attempted suicide and, they've shot themselves in the head, and in the aftermath, and talking to me in those sessions, they're like, you know what? I never even really saw it coming, Dr. Jefferson. Like I truly never saw it come. I remember feeling like this is just too much. Just that. This is just too much, right? And I can't count how many times I've heard people say that. I just remember thinking this was just too much. So this is just too much. This is just too much. I could float away. These things, right? Leading to them doing something that ends up either taking their lives, like taking a handful of pills, taking a bottle full of pills, just sporadically. Because this is what happens when people really want to commit suicide, because there is a difference between being suicidal and being contemplative. Okay. So being actively suicidal is a state of being that sometimes you can't stop yourself or notice that it's about to happen, because it can happen so fast. That's the reason why it's so important to understand what suicidal ideation is, because suicidal ideation is what places you in the suicidal mindset. But because it could be so passive, we will miss it sometimes. So feeling overwhelmed to the point where you're just like, oh, this is just too much. I just want all this to be over with. Start asking yourself the questions like, what do I want to be over? And to what extent, to what capacity do I want this to be over? How so? What is that going to look like for me? Like, you've got to start, I think people have got to do a better job of gauging where they are emotionally, so that you can access the resources within yourself that tell you that you do or don't need immediate help from a professional. Because sometimes we need help from people who are supportive of us. And when I say people who are supportive of us, I'm talking about people that you feel like you can go to and talk to, not people who have identified themselves as folks that are there for you. Right? Because somebody can identify that, oh, girl, hey, hey, sweetie, I'm here for you if you need to talk. And you know that she's the town gossip. The fuck? I'm not going over there. I'm not telling you nothing about me or my business. If I tell you I'm going to commit suicide, I'm not going to get to do it. if I'm really contemplating it, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not even gonna get the help that I need. I'm gonna be driven closer to it, but the whole world gonna know I'm gonna be shamed about it and everything else. So these are things that would happen before I got somebody that was truly supportive, that was able to offer the type of support that I would really need in that moment, which is sometimes simply a listening ear to help me navigate finding the resources within myself to deal with what's in front of me, because sometimes we have it inside of us to deal with the things that are in front of us, but it's so hard to deal with. It's so hard to access because everything in front of us as we're doing the dance is blocking our view. So people that you identify as supportive of you are people that you've gone to and you've told things and you know for sure they haven't spread that to the rest of the world. That they've taken the things that you told them in confidence and they kept it. No matter how small or large, they kept it. Not only that, but they also provided a safe space for you to convey that message. No judgment, just space. So, what I say is when you're feeling that way, when you find that you're having thoughts that don't align with you properly navigating how to find yourself through these situations that present that are just too much for you, too heavy for you, and you're thinking, okay, I just want out of here. Life is too much. It's all too much. Start asking some of those difficult questions and start asking those questions with people that you know you can trust with your life because you've identified that in them. The other component is if you don't have people that you feel that you've identified are supportive, for you, start journaling. The thing that is most effective for us when it's hard for us to kind of get things out is journaling, putting a pen to paper. Not only can it help us get these things out instead of internalizing them and blaming ourselves for everything that happens in our life, but it also helps us to be more creative in our expression, because when we put pen to paper, it's just like manifesting the things that we think in our mind, but not manifesting the dark things, right? So we're exploring those things and we're recognizing that we were thinking about those things, and we are also recognizing that, hey, it's probably not the best thing to be doing right now, because like I could probably go to jail for that, or this probably ain't gonna yield the best results, and you can start checking off what you don't need to do and look at more meaningful ways to deal with those particular issues that made you think the way you were thinking. But also you can help yourself understand how you even came to that point, right? But another thing, and this is a real huge one, it helps you to become more expressive in a creative way. So like spoken word, poetics, the literary way, right? So that's I think that's a great way to become a person that is anonymously out there, just putting stuff, out that other people can relate to when they're also in a dark place and they just kind of need help to start doing the same thing. You could be a motivation for someone or inspiration for someone else that's going through a very difficult time and help them navigate their way out of it as well. So that's that part. But yeah, suicidal ideation could be you thinking about it, considering what it would look like if you were to wake up dead, considering I said wake up dead a lot, you guys, so don't be weird or anything about it. But it could be you considering what life would be like for your family if they had to go on without you, right? That is suicidal ideation. For your partner, if they had to go on without you, your friends, etc. Or it could be actively engaging in a plan as to how you would end your life. And I think that you have to be very, very abrupt with yourself about these things. Like if you've thought about it, I think that we have to be people that remove the stigma associated with suicidal ideation in order for us to navigate and unpack what's associated with the pain that accompanies these feelings, okay, and these thoughts, because the pain is what leads us to these places, okay? And getting the proper help that helps us unpack and then properly process what we see is what helps us to get to a better state of being with our brain pain. So, plans for suicide could be, man, I could just go and play in traffic, right? Or I'll jump off of a bridge. I'm going to go and jump off of a bridge, or I'm gonna do whatever, right? Or just saying, I'm gonna kill myself. Period. So, that's that part. So, a suicide attempt is a non fatal, self directed, potential injurious behavior with the intent to die as a result of the behavior. So they say, I want to be very specific about this because we do have what is called passive suicide attempts as well. And even though it's called a passive suicide attempt, it's still non-fatal, it's still self-directed because you are the person that put yourself in the position to have the event happen where your life could be ended, right? So I'm going to give you a really good example for this. During the time of Black Lives Matter and COVID-19, there were many Black people who were going through extreme distress, justifiably. Okay. As a nation of people, we watched a Black man lose his life on national TV at the knee of a white man on his neck. We watched what was a modern day lynching, and that was extremely distressing. It was an extremely vulnerable moment for not only that man, but also for us as a culture and subculture of people. So it was a very difficult time. Many men felt extremely helpless during this time. And the only thing that they felt they could do is to revolt, okay, against the authority, regardless of if it was that police officer or not, just the authorities in general. So that put armed law enforcement in a very, very difficult position. Very difficult position. You hear law enforcement officers all over talking about the difficulty that they experienced during the aftermath of this time and still are experiencing to this day with young Black men, older Black men who refuse to obey authority. I mean, simple things. Okay. And they're struggling. Okay. So putting yourself in harm's way, going outside with a gun, whether it's loaded or not, pointing that gun at law enforcement after they're telling you put the gun down, put the gun down, put the gun down, begging you to put the gun down, right? This would be called a passive suicide attempt because you're trying to provoke a law enforcement officer to shoot you. Right? Even though that law enforcement, even if that law enforcement officer takes your life, it's still suicide. Because you are the person that you self-directed law enforcement to fire upon you with your actions. Exactly. And we see it all the time also when people go and they play in traffic, literally. That's also a way, it's the way to do it without having to feel like you're doing it. And what I've noticed is that many of the people that I've personally interviewed as a, crisis consultant and crisis counselor for people who have tried to end their lives that way, that actually lived through the experience, these people tell me that, they come from a Christian upbringing or a Catholic upbringing, and had they taken their lives by other means, then they would go to hell, purgatory. Okay. And so this is their way of justifying that means. Right. So I find it to be very interesting. Also I found that some people in that same group of people say that if it's God's will, God will allow them to live, right? And if it's not God's will, they'll die. So, I've heard that one as well. So, it's a lot out there. So I just think it's up to the individual person. But what I want you guys to know is that, when you do have people who convey the message that they are in these dangerous places where they're contemplating ending their lives, I want you to do whatever it is that you can to just create space for them to be able to just convey what's going on with them. Okay. Well, I can't see. Let me see.
I'm not going to tell about it. Just do that.
Well, let's look. So what the sneaker says, if you feel the need to take your own life, then do it. I have no respect for quitters. So let's talk about that. Believe it or not, people who are suicidal have a lot more courage than you think. A lot more. I know that you think it takes less courage to take your own life than not, but it takes a hell of a lot of courage for a person to take their own life. It takes a lot of courage for anybody to give in to death. That's a huge one. As a person who has had a terminal diagnosis of cancer and equally have been on the battlefields in gunfire, taking hostile enemies threats of gunfire, and I've also been a prisoner of war, let me tell you something. The most terrifying thing is when you know that it's coming in a certain amount of time. So if you're going to be the person to take your own life, you would be the person that provokes the restricted time that is coming. And you would be the person that would have to come to terms and accept everything that comes with that within that very small amount of time. And that's a lot to do, which is why we have to look at the overwhelming amount of distress that people have to be going through in order for them to be positioned in a place where they would even come to a place where they want to take their own life. You understand what I'm saying? So, I don't know. I just, it's a lot. It's a lot for sure. So, that's what I have to say about that one. But you're definitely entitled to your opinions or whatever, but I just feel like, based off of what I've seen, it can be pretty tough for folks, okay? So I'm going to put up, suicide has been ruled as one of the leading causes of death of human beings in the United States. And I'm going to let you guys see what the numbers say about where, it is on the continuum. But even before I put those numbers up, I want you guys to kind of understand a couple of things about how these suicide numbers present, right? So if we're looking at the number of people who died from suicide in the past year or so, we would have to come to terms with the fact that when people died from as a result of suicide, these people's deaths were not calculated along with the 93,000 or over 93,000 people that we talked about from drug overdose. And if we had to add them to the numbers, that would raise these numbers, especially the numbers when we're talking about the age groups of 25 to 34 and 35 to 44, considering the ages that I gave you guys of the victims from this recent overdose, just recent. And what we know about DMX, we'd even be taking this thing up to 45 to 54. And Whitney Houston, right? So we would see that suicide would take a huge bump in numbers, a significant bump in numbers, and the leading cause of death in people across the board. Now, these numbers are based on per 100,000 people index. And if you look on the side here is the ranking system, the leading based on the leadings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the way down to 10 on the left, going from the top to the bottom. And then at the top, if we're looking from left to right, the ages are from 10 to 14 in that first group of people. It ranks number 2, with the suicides being 534 per 1,000 people. And then 15 to 24, it's 5,954 per 100,000 people. And I think I said 1,000 people for the first one, but it's 100,000 people. And then we rank number 4 down here when we get from ages 35 to 44 with 7,525 suicides. And that's a lot, though. A ridiculous amount. And these are numbers that are pulled from the CDC's collection of cause of death based on death certificates issued. Your screen's not little. Okay. Oh yeah, you gotta let me take this banner off so that I can bring this up and everybody can see it. But yeah, so we were on where it's ranked as number 4 as the leading cause of death in people aged 35 to 44. And if you look at the number, if we go back up here to the ages 15 to 24, I don't know if I can highlight that. No. Can you guys see this pretty good? But ages 15 to 24 and 25 to 34 are things that we've talked about pretty heavily on this channel before. If we looked at the third leading cause of death of kids between ages 15 to 24 and young adults ages 25 to 34 is homicide. Suicide is above homicide, leading at number 2. Isn't that crazy? Man, insurmountable numbers, though. Good grief. Especially when you get to age 25 to 34, they was like, well, I'm not going to kill most other folks. I'm just going to turn it on myself. So it says that people start to feel more helpless at that age. And then ages 35 to 44, it starts to decrease and the leading cause of death. Homicide, however, takes the number 4 slot. Homicide is now number 4 between the kids that are age 10 to 14 at that point. And then malignant neoplasm, good grief, is now 15 to 24. So these are kids dying from brain tumors and things like that. Same things are happening between ages 25 to 34. And then suicide is trailing. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
As they get older, after their friends have died off. That's really sad.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so you don't really see suicide numbers start to fall off pretty, to where they're not ranking high on the scale until you start seeing people get real older, over age 65 is what they're saying, pretty much.
You don't think about it.
Yeah.
You don't live your best life.
They've lived their best life. They figure they're done.
At 25, that's that threshold where you either know what you're going to do or take the wrong turn, lose 10 years.
Well, 65 is also like end stage life crisis, kind of like that thing they're going through. The very difficult, yeah, autonomy versus shame.
Right.
So if they're gonna do it, they go ahead and do it, but they got a lot of other things that's gonna kill them before they get to that. Good grief. But yeah, so it's a pretty prevalent issue for young people. And I want you guys to,
a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Society, peer pressure. Social media.
Accidental death, unintentional death is where you guys would find those drug overdoses, by the way, that I was talking about earlier. You see the numbers though? They remain the number one cause of death all the way from kids age 10 to 14 to adults age 35 to 44. That's what I want you guys to really pay attention to. Remember I said earlier? With suicide trailing, and I want you to look at the numbers. Suicide trailing at half that in the first 3 cases. So, I mean, I want you guys to understand, like, this is a huge issue. We have to understand that it's really important that we know what's out there and we know the risk so that we can prepare our kids properly and we can have the conversation, because I think most of the problem is that we are not able to have the conversation with our children appropriately. And that can sometimes be difficult. When you're thinking about having the conversation with your child, with your loved one, with your family member, with the people that are close to you, even with friends, having a conversation about potential suicidal ideation, it can make you feel very uncomfortable and it can make them feel uncomfortable as well. But the more comfortable we are with having the conversation, the less we have to worry about engaging in the plans to bury a person as a result of suicide. And that's what I need you guys to understand. Start having the difficult conversation around the fact that it's easy for us to get into situations that seem overwhelming, because they are. That's a part of life. But we have to find ways to continue to push, because life experiences are not for nothing. Everything that happens in our life happens to us, through us, for a reason. It's up to us to redefine our purpose at every stage of life, every phase of life. And if it doesn't make sense, if it gets too difficult, then we need to incorporate other people along the journey and invite them in to help us explore what this really means for us, what we should be doing with this, whatever that is. If you know a person who is currently experiencing a crisis where they feel suicidal or homicidal, please get them help. The number has been streaming on the bottom of this thing all evening. But also, if you need it, the number is 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-TALK, or 715 8255. You can access the number one way or the other. Please understand that just because you find yourself in a place where you feel helpless, hopeless, or like life is just too much, it doesn't mean that you are a bad person. It doesn't mean that you are a person who is, it's okay for you to be ridiculed. I welcome you looking for help so that you can find yourself in a place to where you become more congruent with where you feel like you should be in your life. And you find the resources that you need within yourself to navigate feeling more welcomed, healed, whole, and filled with the resources you need to continue to move on in the next phase of your life and have successes. I am available. I'm currently accepting new patients, which is a great thing. I'm typically full. And I think so are two of the clinicians in my practice. But I want to leave you guys on this note. When someone tells you that they want to die, don't take that lightly. Get them the help they need. Even if it's just you connecting them with the crisis line, we will provide assistance to them, regardless of what time it is, what day it is, what holiday it is. We're always available. 100% of the time, there is always someone available to pick up the phone, a live person, not a machine, so that we can navigate you through your issue. And we can get you the help that you need. So pick the phone up. It's not difficult. It really isn't. You never know whose life that you can save and who you can give a brighter tomorrow today. So that's all I have. I want you guys to be a positive impact on the people around you, the folks that you are directly connected to, and the people that you are not directly connected to. And if you feel like you cannot be a positive impact on those folks, just do not go around impeding on their positive energy with your negative energy and all that good stuff. Until next time, I'll be seeing you guys later. Bye.
Who alive can't put me in a box. I redefine any definition you got. I am the tiger, I'm making steps to the top. The flames, I rip it up, you just gotta hand me the rock. Take a seat, you cannot stand it. All I know, the flow harder than a Scotch bunny. Don't try better me, you cannot manage. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon.